I think I became aware of the Japanese folk creatures called yokai the first time I played Pocky and Rocky on the SNES, although the yokai were mistranslated as goblins in the English version of that game. Later, Ghibli films like Princess Mononoke and Spirited Away piqued my interest in the subject, and later still, films like The Great Yokai War and the Yokai Monsters series started converting that interest into an unhealthy obsession. The first book I read on the subject is called Yokai Attack, the Japanese Monster Survival Guide, by the wife and husband team Hiroko Yoda and Matt Alt. The book was a fun introduction into yokai lore, and it may or may not have saved my life on several occasions since. Hiroko and Matt followed this up with Yurei Attack, another survival guide, but this time one that will safeguard you against traditional Japanese ghosts called Yurei. I recently visited Japan, and during my trip I started researching a new video about Kaidan, or Japanese scary stories. I thought, who better to ask about this subject than the team that had introduced me to many of these concepts in the first place? So I contacted Matt Alt, and to my surprise, he agreed to meet me for a conversation about yokai and yurei. Unfortunately, Hiroko couldn't make it, but Matt and I met up at the most thematically appropriate place I could think of, the Yurei Izakaya near Kichijoji Station in Tokyo. This izakaya is an homage to all things scary and Japanese, both in its decor and its menu, and I highly recommend it if you're in the area. I should acknowledge that my inexperience in the whole interview format is painfully obvious, but if you can look past that, I think the conversation goes to some interesting places. So without further introduction, ikimashou. So first of all, creatures like yokai, do you think that they have some sort of connection to the traditions of Shinto? Like, for instance, the animistic aspect of Shinto, that, everything has a spirit. Does that convert to the umbrella monster yokai or the sandal monster yokai?
Well, yokai aren't Shinto in nature, right?
Okay.
They're not worshipped. They're not like the subject of veneration, right?
Right.
But they do come from, just like you said, that same kind of animistic and polytheistic background that Shinto does. So, from that kind of broad sense, they're related. But that's like saying, are eggs related to Christianity because they use them in the Easter, or trees, or pine trees related to Christianity because we see them in those types of situations. When you start unraveling the threads, you realize that the connection isn't as strong as it seems. But yokai definitely come from that animism and polytheism that's so inherent to the Japanese worldview.
Right. So not a direct, it's not directly related to Shinto. They're not they're not kami. They're not. It's a completely different aspect of folklore, Japanese folklore. Right. But they do have similar elements.
Yes. Yokai are kind of spirits of the material world. They kami in Shinto live on high. They're great gods. We don't really interact with them. But yokai, on the other hand, we do. They're sort of in our realm, but not of it. Right. And their main reason for existing, their purpose, is generally to freak us out, to give us a scare. So these aren't gods that anybody would kind of venerate or worship, but they're certainly on a different level than we are as human beings, I guess you might say.
Right. So they're a little bit more of our world, and they sort of can tamper with our lives a little bit more. Yeah. Kind of similar to folk creatures, perhaps from other cultures like fairies or the fae, but completely Japanese, completely distinct culturally. But I guess you could say in a way that fairies, people believe in them, but they're not considered to be religious. They're considered to be a folk creation.
Folk belief, an old wives' tale, a superstition, if you want to say it that way. That's what they are, and they're really. There's so many different types of them out there, and that's really what distinguishes yokai in Japan, I think, from things like fairies or leprechauns or those kind of folk beliefs where it's just this, there's fairies are fairies, leprechaun are leprechauns. But in Japan, there was this huge variety of yokai. Everything from, screamy, screechy, boogeyman type creatures that you would associate with monsters, all the way down to things like a boy holding a block of tofu boy.
Boy.
You have this kind of, a lot of yokai aren't very scary. And that's something I think that's really interesting.
In a way, they're kind of more fun, or they're...
Well, some of them are, some of them aren't.
Right, some of them are a little bit scary, I would say, The woman
woman with the neck. I forget what she's
the
called.
snake-necked woman. Yoku be a very, very traditional type of yokai.
Yeah, she scares the hell out of me.
Well, sure. I mean, yokai are scary. That's what they are. That's what they do. That's why they exist. And what they really are is, if you want to get back to that anthropomorphism and that polytheism and animism, is they are characters of our fears as people. When something goes bump in the dark, we say the things that go bump in the dark, but Japanese have actually made a kind of yokai character for that sort of thing, for each and every situation that you might be scared of.
They've sort of defined that and personified it into a yokai character. Right.
And you could even call that the roots of Japanese character culture now. Because right now, today, in the modern era, everybody associates Japan with, like, mascots, like Hello Kitty, or, like, anime characters, or all sorts of things like that. And why is Japan so great at creating characters? Why? And, that is the question that was driving Hiroko and I when we started researching this. We realized that the yokai and the yurei, the ghosts, to a certain extent, are the roots of that culture.
Well, if you look at these scrolls, those famous yokai scrolls, or you think about when it was created, it's amazing how cartoonish those figures look. It's almost like it looks like animation today, almost.
Well, it's funny you say that, because scrolls are believed to be a precursor of modern animation, and actually Takahata Isao, who is the co-founder of Studio Ghibli with Hayao Miyazaki, he wrote a book called 12th Century Animation. Now, of course, there wasn't any real animation back in the 12th century. But what he's talking about are scrolls, and actually the way when you unroll them, there's a way to unroll them. We've forgotten this, because we have animation in comic books now, but back in time when people did it, they would unroll them, and this is one section of time, this is one section of time, and they're actually interactive that way. So it is interactive entertainment.
So the storytelling process is very much involved in the way you unroll it, and then you slide it, and then you roll it back.
Exactly. You didn't just unroll it and kind of walk along it. Like you see, that's how it's often displayed in a museum situation these days, because they have to show everybody everything.
Right.
But back in time, you were an aristocrat or a monk or somebody who had the means, and you would sit there and unroll them piece by piece and watch the yokai parading across the page, or animals at play. Bunny rabbits and frogs wrestling each other. All sorts of these precursors of modern manga culture.
That's interesting. And also, Isao Takahata did that Pompoko, which was a great yokai movie of the Tanuki.
Hey, Mom, we're missing the monster parade. Honey, wait.
I used to see stuff like that too when I was a kid.
So a huge number of the yokai are what are called anthropomorphic characters, which is basically a physical object that you put a face on, and it's kind of like an enchanted object. Just like in Beauty and the Beast, there's those like kind of enchanted teaware and like the whole house.
Right. Yeah.
In the Beauty and the Beast setting, of course, they're all cursed. But in Japan, it's more about objects having a soul of their own. And once a certain number of years have passed, some say 99, some say others, they can kind of take on a life of their own.
So does that relate to sort of the Japanese, cultural philosophy of trying to care for things, or use things to the best way possible?
It's certainly been linked to that, and there's a whole story of where those kind of yokai come from, and if you're interested in this sort of thing, there's a really great book called Introduction to Yokai Culture by a professor named Komatsu Kazuhiko. Yes, and Hiroko and I actually translated that book. It's available in English, and I highly recommend it because it has a lot of really deep scholarly insights on this stuff.
So, Japanese ghosts, Yurei, it seems to me that there's something about, they come back and they sort of, there's a vengeance aspect to them, where they come back and they sort of avenge things in the afterlife that they couldn't avenge in their actual life. So is there some link to Japanese culture? I was thinking maybe specifically Buddhism and karma, or like, somebody who has done something bad lives with that in the next life.
The thing you have to remember is that Yurei culture, as we know it today, is deeply connected to Edo period, which is about 200 years ago, 1600s to the mid-1800s. Edo-era popular culture, because ghost stories were some of the most popular types of kabuki plays, and the most popular types of woodblock prints, and the most popular types of motifs to put on kimonos or to carve netsuke, which are little accoutrements that you would put onto your obi belt.
Right.
So they were hugely popular back then. And one of the reasons is, of course, just what you say, because you can write a really good exploitation story about somebody who is mistreated and then comes back to life as a ghost and then exacts their revenge. I mean, Japanese kabuki watchers were every bit into that kind of thing as modern-day movie watchers are.
But do you think that had something to do with people wanting to feel empowered? Like, maybe if I can't do something in this life, I can do it when I'm a ghost.
Certainly. And, like, I think you have to remember that Japan in the Edo period was an extremely stratified society, right?
Okay.
There's samurai who are kind of like aristocrats, right? And then there's commoners who are beneath them, and that's further stratified down into merchants and farmers and all sorts of
strict social hierarchy.
Exactly, a strict social hierarchy. Now, of course, people are people, and so it's not like this was 100% fixed and people would never interact. But your social standing really affected your life back then. If you're a samurai, you could certainly get away with different things you couldn't get away by. You could mistreat people beneath you.
You could chop somebody's head off if they looked at you the wrong way.
Exactly, and that's why so many of these stories are dealing with. The most famous Yurei stories are almost always about women who are mistreated because they were traditionally on an even lower level than men. You know? And so when you mistreat a woman this badly and she can come back to get you, this definitely shows this kind of like karmic retribution. The most famous Yurei story of all time is called the Plate Counting Ghost.
Right.
And it's about a woman, a servant woman, who accidentally broke one of these precious pieces of chinaware that her samurai master had in his collection. And he punished her by throwing her down a well. Right?
I wanted to go to the castle. There's an actual castle that you can go and see the well that supposedly has this woman, this ghost in it.
Very, very famous.
Yeah.
And what happens is, night after night, her ghost comes back out of the well and just starts counting the plates. She doesn't attack him. She doesn't run screaming through the streets. She just kind of shames him.
Yeah, that's actually a good segue into something else I want to talk about, which is it seems like there's differences in the Japanese approach to scary stories, Kaidan, and the sort of the Western approach. And something that I've noticed in the Japanese approach is that very often the ghost is not a physical threat. Like in the West, a lot of times ghosts or monsters are a physical threat.
Sure.
They will come and they will kill you. But in Japanese ghost stories, oftentimes it's more like a psychological threat in a way. It's more cerebral. In the West, it seems to be more physical.
There are certainly physically attacking ghosts.
Right, there are, yeah.
So, but yeah, some of them are like the plate counting ghost, who's just kind of shaming you, and back in time in particular, being shamed was a really powerful force in Japanese society, and even to an extent today, and actually all over the world. Nobody wants to be shamed publicly by this uncontrollable thing that's happening that's obviously their fault, and whenever it manifests, it's like their badge of shame.
Right.
So it's there's definitely that aspect, and I don't know that you necessarily see those types of ghosts as much. Although there's in Shakespeare, Banquo's ghost,
absolutely,
is very accusatory, just kind of quietly accusatory. So these concepts are not uniquely Japanese.
Yeah, they're not uniquely Japanese.
We don't want to, but the way the Japanese manifest them, the way they consume them, and that's the thing. You have to look at yokai and yurei to a certain extent as products.
Right.
Especially in the Edo period when yokai started selling books and selling prints and
they didn't literally sell them. Like the yokai didn't go on the street corner and sell.
They did not, unfortunately.
but there were.
But yokai
there were
being
books.
on something made up.
Right. Exactly. Right.
And they didn't really even have appearances until the Edo period when artists started drawing them for fun. Way back in time when people were talking about yokai-like things.
Right.
And I say yokai-like because the word yokai is very new. That's actually only really used since the 20th century.
Oh, really?
And back in time, they used words like bakemono or mononoke, which is where you get Mononoke Hime, the ghost princess.
Mononoke Hime, Princess Mononoke.
From Ghibli.
Yeah.
Oni.
Yeah, Oni.
There's all sorts of. Well, now Oni are associated with the horns and the club and the big red. But back in time, Oni were much more of a diffuse, kind of ethereal, not really pegged to any one specific appearance sort of thing. That appearance comes from the Edo period too.
Right.
And they were considered to be like these harbingers of ill fortune.
So did the appearance come because of the books and the scrolls that were being created in the Edo period, when people, illustrators or artists would define them?
Until people like Toriyama Sekien, who is the most famous illustrator of yokai in Japan, and whose book we just translated. It's called Japandemonium Illustrated.
Japandemonium Illustrated.
Look forward, my name Hiroko, and
I will make it pop up here.
No, but seriously, Toriyama Sekien, who's the most famous artist of Japanese yokai, until these artists like him started drawing them, they didn't have any fixed appearance.
Right.
They were just considered things.
They were concepts.
Yes.
Right.
I guess if I had any one piece of advice to foreign people who are really interested in yokai culture, it's not to get too hung up on strict definitions.
Right.
Because everybody always wants to know, what's this? What's this? What's that? And like, when you're talking about this culture, it's like 2,000 or more years.
And it's changed. It's evolved.
Changed. It continues changing.
It's evolved, that's something that the internet wants to do all the time, is strictly define things and say, no, my way is the right way. But you're saying it's a little bit looser than that. There's an evolution, and it's there's a lot of different interpretations, and there's a lot of different ways to look at it. Even even within Japanese culture.
Definitely.
There's more yokai than titties in Idaho, like cheese squeak in his po-po.
So, I guess something I wanted to ask you. This is an extremely tough question because I've been thinking about it, and it's something that you can't. If there almost isn't any answer to it, but what would you say are defining characteristics that separate Japanese horror or their approach to ghost stories or Kaidan from the Western style of ghost stories?
Well, do you actually, this is an interesting question, right?
Yeah.
Because now, nothing.
Right.
Why? Because the film The Ring introduced Westerners to this concept of the Japanese ghost, and now you see those tropes everywhere.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Everywhere.
After The Ring, it's in Western horror. There's a bunch of them that use those kind of Japanese tropes.
I just as an example, Hiroko and I watched the remake of It, the Stephen King book turned into a movie last night.
Yeah, I love that.
It's really well done. But now Pennywise the Clown is basically Sadako. The way he moves.
You're right.
There's like a bunch of Ring-inspired scenes in there.
But before, do you think even traditionally there is any difference between...
Sure. I think Western horror, if I'm going to be in a very broad sense, is about horror of the self. Either you're under attack, or your individuality is under attack. It's you versus a horde
individual personhood.
Yes, you've been bitten by a zombie. Now you're just one of them. You're another one of the crowd. That's like what Americans and Westerners seem to fear the most. Whereas in Japanese horror, those Japanese kinds of horror tropes tend to come from a much more, I think, tradition-rooted sort of thing. Even Godzilla, the first Godzilla movie, he is described as kind of like being very yokai-like, or a spirit that was worshipped by the people on this island until the nuclear bomb turned it into a giant.
Well, one of my favorite KAIJU movies, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah,
KAIJU movies is... and I'm gonna blank on the name here, but it's actually a kami. It's a stone guy, a stone samurai.
Daimajin.
The Daimajin.
Daimajin, those are great. Yeah, those are really great.
The reason I love those is because they specifically refer to him, the statue, as a kami, much like a Shinto shrine.
And look, they've angered it.
Right. They angered it. They disrespect the land.
Exactly.
And which the kami watches over, and then it literally just gets out of its stone chair and starts killing people.
Also, if you look at, to go back to The Ring, the rules of that are very alien to foreigners. So, like, she is a Yurei, right, who died because she was mistreated by her. Spoiler alert: she was mistreated by her family and thrown down a well.
Completely ruined it for me because I've never seen her. No, I have.
Anyway, sorry.
It's okay.
But anyway, like, why would she be attacking everybody? Why isn't she just going after, like, her parents?
Right.
So, like, why isn't she going after people in her lineage? Right. Because that's what, for instance, Nightmare on Elm Street.
Right.
Freddy is killing the children of the family who burned him to death.
Right, there's a specific link to the specific people.
Exactly.
Yeah, that wronged him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and that gets to the concept of a curse in Japan. A yurei, a cursed thing, is not just a problem for the person who's cursed.
Right.
It's almost like this psychic landmine.
It's almost like a disease that can spread. It's almost like something intangible that
a problem for everybody.
Right.
Not just for you and your individuality. You see what I'm saying? So there's a subtle kind of differences and changes. You could write an entire book about this. People should. But
you should.
Maybe I should.
It's a great idea.
So I want to thank Mr. Matt Alt here for meeting with me and talking about Japanese horror and Kaidan and Yurei and Yokai. I hope you go pick up his books about these concepts. Him and his wife have written some great books, and you should check them all out. Yeah, it's been nice.
Well, thanks for having me.
Nice meeting you.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so I'll see you later. And
well, thanks for having me. Seriously, I really appreciate it, and see you next time.
Yeah, see you next time.